This video contains spoilers for aspects of the recent 1.3 world quest, Dainsleif, the Bowkeeper. If you have not yet completed that questline, it may be better if you click away now and return upon its completion. You have been warned. With the release of Genshin Impact version 1.2, we were introduced to Dragonspine, an inhospitable environment covered from head to toe in relics of the ancients. These relics form a fragmented tale of a now lost kingdom of the mountain, known as Salvindagnir. The mountain kingdom of Salvindagnir wasn't always an inhospitable one, however. At one time, it was a lush and green paradise. The people of the mountain lived in the shade of a great undying silver tree. For many generations, they thrived. One fateful day, the blessed daughter of the High Priestess, a princess of the mountain, would find herself in peril, but would have the fortune to be rescued by a chivalrous knight, an outlander from beyond the heavens. She offered to give the knight all that she had in return for his service to her, but he turned them down, with an exception of the pure white flower that she had offered him. Stating that chivalry was its own reward, he wore the flower over his heart. In this fresco, painted by the same revered princess of Vindagnir, it depicts the outlander bringing the priests of the mountain what appears to be an atomic whirl. But on closer inspection, this is not quite what it appears. While the upper portion of the whirl seems to have at one time been closed and is now faded, the lower portion of the whirl is left fully open, invoking the image of a real-world organization whose atheist ideology is only through the use of scientific analysis and free open inquiry can humankind reach out for a better life. The open portion is meant to symbolize the search for knowledge and sometimes further questions. With this symbolism now established, he holds out his arms, presenting his knowledge to the people of the mountain, who also stand with arms outstretched, as if ready to receive it willingly. The ruling priests are even shown on their knees, with outstretched arms, openly accepting the gifts as well. Acting as something of an emissary, the Outlander had offered them the knowledge of a better life, one of science and inquiry, one without the oversight of the celestial gods and archons. The Outlander may have then for a time stayed in the kingdom of Vindagnir. I believe a large portion of this knowledge he offered them was related to the leyline network, as well as sharing its connection to the world and the elements. During this time, the Outlander grew close to the princess, who returned her affection for him as well. For a time, all seemed to be well, until the princess had a dream in which a black dragon descends upon the mountain, blotting out the sun. It is said that the princess knew this to be an omen of doom. After this, the knight departed the mountain in search of answers. Was he looking for the cause of her dream? Possibly. Or did he take back up his search for the Genesis Pearl? It is during his long absence, an unknown object, which would come to be known as the Nail, fell from the heavens, sealing the people's access to the domain and leyline network at the mountain's peak, cutting them off from their deepest connection to the leylines and all that they had learned. In this moment, it seemed as if the world were ending. The undying silver tree of the mountain, with its roots to the leyline network severed, shattered. A blizzard moved over the mountain, blocking out the sky and covering the once green lands in a thick blanket of snow. They were unable to heal the ley line's connection to the great silver tree, and fearing its death was near, the princess attempted to replant the largest part of the tree that she could find, but it was doomed. It would not grow. They attempted to reach out to the knight in hopes that he would return and deliver them from this peril. They crafted a greatsword made from star silver. Through him it is said it could have cleaved the ice and snow from the mountain. With the sword now ready for his return, their scouts set out, but could not locate him. and no message would return to the mountain to suggest that he knew of their plight and was on his way to provide aid. This is when the princess began to paint the frescoes, depicting here an image of the mountain, the nail in place. Looming over the mountain, Celestia, blotting out the sun, perhaps an intentional parallel of her vision of the black dragon, letting not but a few rays of sun fall to the mountain as her father, the high priest, burdens his subjects with offerings to the abode of the gods, with good faith that the celestial overseers would deliver them from where their new ideology could not. The fresco suggests that the princess understood, through the knowledge brought by the Outlander, that the tales of Celestia were not but lies. And here we are again, presented with another instance of the idea that the powers in the heavens are lying to the humans over which they claim dominion. In this message, the princess writes to her knight of her understanding that though her father the priest is doing his best to appease the gods above, she knows the gods will not deliver them from the ruin their blasphemy has brought upon them. We know the dream that she had of the Black Dragon was false. The death of the Black Dragon Durin is an event which wouldn't take place for many hundreds if not thousands of years. She would never witness this, and her kingdom and people would lie in ruin long before its occurrence. So was it a false message by the celestial overseers? Fearing the Outlander's power, they sent her a dream intending to draw the night away, leaving them to suffer in his absence. The mountain grew colder by the day, and the high priest would climb to the mountain's frozen summit, continuing to make offerings to the heavens. Before his final climb, he asked his daughter to continue her work on the fresco, so she began a piece she would never finish, one which depicts the mountain kingdom restored. The great silver tree again at its full glory, and the mountain green once more. But by this time, the princess claimed it had been so long since she last saw the sky or grass that she was unsure which hues would best capture the scene her father desired so much to see. Feeling she had failed, she asked for her father's forgiveness. But in her heart, the reason she could not continue wasn't as simple as a lack of vision. She was lost in her grief that the night had still not yet returned. It was at this time she shifted her focus to her final work, the portion of the fresco which depicted her winged savior, the Outlander who brought knowledge to her people. She left this, along with the snow-tombed silver greatsword, praying for his return each day. But he never came, and in time, she, like so many of her people, would pass from this world, and she was laid to rest on the west side of the mountain. The Outlander did return to Vindagnir, trudging through the once familiar paths which were now unrecognizable under the thick snow. He was horrified to find the princess and all of her people dead or gone. The messages left behind for him, whether they cursed him or spoke of a time in which they wished he would return to save them, now served only as a painful reminder of his failure to arrive in time. Images depicting their suffering whilst attempting to appease the gods in vain were all that he found. The machines he once helped them create left behind a cryptic series of numbers and dots, likely once a complete message, but today, degraded, only decodes to, "For the nation we can't forgo this skyborn power, but we failed." What exactly this means, we don't know. But among one of the messages left behind on the scribe's box, one of 3 boxes which unlocked the room in which the fresco and sword rested, suggested that other nations without gods were forming. The Outlander and Knight, knowing so much needless suffering occurred, and that the princess died awaiting his return, felt in this moment a great anger rising. The gods and deities of this land were only too happy to watch those living below them suffer. He vowed to help them pass their time with a song of iron and blood, allowing them the enjoyment of watching his own suffering as he worked tirelessly to spare the land of the monsters and evils which the overseers seemed so satisfied to ignore. So the once chivalrous knight descended the mountain to find a war in which to paint the lands red, and would wage that war for such a time as he became so bloodstained beyond a point where he could no longer differentiate his own blood upon his armor from that of his foes. His actions became so fueled by hatred for the deities of the world that his chivalrous demeanor left him, unable to stop the tide of death and destruction overtaking the lands of Teyvat. One by one, the civilizations who had once cherished the knowledge he and the heir that came before him had brought to them were being removed from the land. But still, he continued his fight. It wasn't until an individual the knight had rescued recoiled from his outstretched hand as a result of his war-torn appearance that he realized he had lost himself. He returned to his home amongst the heavens, but when he passed through the portal, it was not what it once was. It had fallen into darkness, becoming a place in which time had no meaning. And there, he learned a terrible truth. His home was gone. The same monsters which brought destruction to those in Teyvat brought similar death to those who dared not to worship the celestial gods in his own world as well. A curse was placed upon his people by his own kin. The first heir transformed them into mindless creatures, in turn controlled by abyss mages which compel them to commit atrocities throughout the lands. Here it is said that the former chivalrous knight died in battle. But did he really? Or in his final battle, was the Dane of the night too intense? Dane being contextually synonymous with disdain, which is defined as a feeling that someone or something is unworthy of one's consideration or respect. A word that was once spelled differently in our own real world. That Dane was indeed so intense that the heir, a word once spoken as lef, and finds its derivation from the Old Norse word lefer, was reborn as something new. Dainsleif, the disdainful heir. His hatred for what had become of his home was too powerful to die here. The timeline for the period in which Danes may have returned to his home seems to add up. The Gnostic chorus seems more and more likely to have been told by Venti to Danes, and through Dane's recollection given to us during Venti's collected miscellany, he says, "1,000 years have passed since the god of Animo left this land, but to me, it has only been half that time," suggesting a personal connection of some kind to the Animo Archon. Is it possible, during this time 500 years ago, a time in which Danes fought hard to stop the tide of destruction from consuming the civilizations which were once inspired by the great knowledge of his own people, he met with Venti and gained the knowledge of the fate of his kin, fearing a similar fate would await him if he remained, and feeling that this world would only suffer more with his continued presence, he returned home. But while he was there in the abyss, after learning that awful truth, Dainsleif encountered someone he did not expect, a light in that darkness, a traveler not from his world, nor from Teyvat, an innocent, cast into the abyss amongst the destruction by his kin. It was Lumine. We know that after being absorbed by the first heir, Lumine was dropped into the abyss, but we were never shown the manner in which she escaped. I believe it is then possible that Dainsleif helped her exit the abyss through the portal into Teyvat, and found new purpose, serving as her traveling companion, while she searched for the whereabouts of her lost brother. Living in this age of death and destruction, Lumine would have good reason to question the powers that exist in Teyvat. They'd taken her brother away, and brought on the peoples of this land so much suffering. Her traveling companion Dainsleif would certainly share no love for them either. For many years, the two likely traveled Teyvat, unable to find her sibling. Lumine likely would have then begun to worry that Aether, similarly to her, was defeated by the unknown god and cast within the abyss, but lacking her good fortune to find a guide, never found his way out. Reluctantly, Dainsleif returned to his former home once more, with Lumine to search for him. Despite their now long history of traveling together, I believe it is here, in the abyss, the two parted ways once more. Lumine wouldn't find Aether because he was not there, but while there, she learned the proper truth from Danes of his origin, learning that he is kin to the one who separated her from her brother. And that power now sits on a throne of lies, claiming dominion over the peoples of Teyvat. Throughout much of this theory, I've mentioned aspects of the story of the chivalrous, bloodstained knight, but there are a couple of lines yet from the bloodstained chivalry which I've not yet mentioned. The quotations of the timepiece. The ancient kingdom was wrongfully cursed, turning its inhabitants into monsters. The code of chivalry tolerates not such injustice. If abyss be thy name, I pledge to you my loyalty. These, I believe, were not the words of the chivalrous knight himself, whom I have now described to be Dainsleif, but rather, they are the words of yet another soul claimed in this war. Words he will never forget, spoken to him by Lumine as she attempted to convince him to wage war once more against his kin and the celestial overseers of Teyvat. Here she lost her way and pledged her loyalty to the abyss, serving as their leader. With the second question now finally resolved, I believe I can now finally move on to the final question. Where are the heirs now? With the release of 1.3, we've learned a reasonable amount about Dainsleif. For a time, we've even traveled alongside him as he attempts to learn as much about us as we do of him. He, however, seems to cast aside lines of reasoning, which may call into question matters regarding his age and who his former traveling companion was. But given the fact that his dialogue changes the gender of his former companion based upon which traveler we've chosen as players, we can reasonably assume that he was once close with our sibling and is withholding that information until he's learned whether or not we will become strong enough to challenge him for the right to rescue our sibling from their war with destiny. Danes has now also mentioned on a few occasions that his memories too have faded. Another likely connection between Danes and the first heir, whose memories were confirmed to have faded by Venti, but the memory Danes cherishes the most is the one which he will always remember. She too loved these flowers. I believe a reference to the flower he was given by the Princess of Indagnir upon his rescue of her many years earlier. A flower that was destined to become bloodstained and hard as iron. It is the memory of his failure then, which I believe motivates him now. He keeps his distance from Lumine, as she has thrown in her lot with the Abyss Mages, which now enslave the cursed monsters which were once his people, while pledging himself to defy the world with a power from beyond, likely a reference to picking up his search once more for the Genesis Pearl, in hopes that he may use it to free Lumine from the cycle of vengeance and death he once found himself trapped within. The first heir we know less about. After she banished Aether and Lumine, she's all but disappeared. Within the confines of the theory I've crafted, it then leaves plenty of motivations on the table when you consider the threats Celestia would have perceived in the first and second heirs. It's clear that they would dispatch their weapon against our own travelers, a weapon which, after being deceived, may now sit upon the throne in Celestia, thinking herself the ruler of all those below. But in reality, she is being used by the overseers to solidify their rule by destroying those that would dare not follow the doctrine of their heavenly principles. It is also possible that she may have been sealed away herself during the events of the Calamity 500 years ago, a tale which only wind and time may tell. Now, going back to the beginning, in the scene of the Black Pullet I described, it clearly foreshadows future events for Aether and Lumine. The spirit of the old mage, I believe, represents Dainsleif in this cycle, watched as the giant woman representing the first heir brought sadness and terror to the mortals in the living realm as the two lights of war and wisdom passed, the lights representing our twins separated, aligning themselves with the generals of two armies. Lumine, the representation of war, aligned herself with the army of the Abyss. Aether, the representation of wisdom, will with time ally himself to the general of the army of worthy cause, who may possibly be the Tsaritsa, a once loving Archon who today has hardened her heart to do what must be done. But for now, we don't yet fully understand the motivations of the Tsaritsa's powerful army, nor her plot to gather the Gnosis from the other Archons. Does it have anything to do with why the Electro-Archon Bal has begun to reclaim all visions within her own territory? A theory we may discuss in the future. What do you think of this possible relationship between Dainsleif and the Sustainer? After hearing all of this, do you think the story of the Gnostic Chorus was actually referring to them? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and don't forget to click the bell icon so that you are notified when my next video goes live. Lastly, join the Teyvat Historia Discord server to discuss Genshin Impact's lore, mechanics, or even exchange your theories with the community members. Thanks for watching Teyvat Historia. May the 7 guide you, travelers.